In 11 agonizing seconds, did Gavin Newsom's famous smile and his political career die on a debate stage under a single, devastating question from Donald Trump? Gavin Newsom thought he had trapped Donald Trump on a debate stage in California, but in exactly 11 seconds of agonizing silence, the entire political world watched a 2-3-year career completely disintegrate. At exactly 9:47 p.m. Pacific Time, broadcasting live to an audience of 40 million people, the famous smile of Governor Gavin Newsom simply stopped working. It was a smile that had served him flawlessly for 23 years. It had carried him through 2 inaugurations, shielded him through a grueling recall election, and allowed him to glide past scandals that would have annihilated the careers of lesser politicians. For over 2 decades, it was a display of perfect teeth, immaculate hair, and a countenance that never broke character while the cameras were rolling. And then a man from Queens, New York, asked him a single devastating question. For 11 endless seconds, the governor of California stood frozen at a podium in his own capital city, entirely unable to utter a word. This is the comprehensive account of those 11 seconds and the brutal dissection that paved the way to that moment. The debate had been Newsom's own grand design. He had publicly challenged Donald Trump back in April, radiating the bravado of a man who had already dismantled Ron DeSantis in a nationally televised showdown. Newsom firmly believed he could replicate that victory against a much larger target. Trump accepted the challenge on the very same day. "I love California," he posted on social media. "Beautiful state, terrible governor. Let's do it." The venue was the Sacramento Convention Center in June. 2,000 people packed the seats, while 40 million tuned into the live stream, marking it as the most consequential political debate since the presidential election cycle. The seating arrangement was a vivid display of partisan power. In the front row on the left side of the aisle sat Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, and Chuck Schumer. Behind them, 2 solid rows of California Democrats, congressmen, state senators, and party officials formed a visual fortress of the Democratic establishment. On the right side of the aisle, the front row featured Vice President J.D. Vance, a leather notebook resting open on his lap. Beside him sat Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his arms tightly crossed and his jaw set. Next to DeSantis was Vivek Ramaswamy, sitting impeccably upright, observing the stage with the intense focus of a spectator at a heavyweight title fight. Newsom made his entrance first. He wore a sharply tailored navy suit paired with a red tie, a calculated sartorial power play executed on what was traditionally Republican visual turf. His hair was completely flawless. His smile was weaponized and perfect. He cast a brief glance toward Pelosi, who offered him a single, curt nod of approval. Trump emerged second. He also wore a navy suit and a red tie. He waved to the crowd as the room fractured, half erupting in cheers, the other half descending into boos. Trump appeared entirely unfazed by the division. Newsom won the coin toss, granting him the first opening remarks. He rose casually, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the podium with the measured stride of a man who had practiced the movement in front of a mirror 1,000 times. He did not raise his voice. He did not resort to pounding his fists on the lectern. Instead, he spoke with the polished cadence of a senior partner at a prestigious law firm delivering a closing argument to a jury. "Thank you for being here, Mr. President," Newsom began, his tone smooth and confident. "It takes real courage to come to California, the state that rejected you by 5 million votes, twice." A gentle ripple of laughter cascaded from the left side of the auditorium. Jeffries offered a soft, polite clap, while Schumer allowed a satisfied smile to cross his face. "I know this is incredibly uncomfortable for you," Newsom continued. "You generally prefer rallies where everyone in the room already agrees with every word you say. Tonight, you are going to have to earn it. He paused masterfully, letting the weight of the opening jab settle over the room. Let me start by addressing the massive elephant in the room. I am standing next to a man who has been convicted of 34 felonies, a man who desperately attempted to overturn a legitimate democratic election, a man whose very own vice president testified against him before a grand jury. And I desperately want the people of California to take a long, hard look at him tonight, because this is exactly what the absolute decline of a political movement looks like. In the front row, Pelosi's thin lips curved into a tight, satisfied line of approval. DeSantis shifted his weight slightly in his seat, seamlessly, like a luxury car shifting gears. Newsom pivoted straight into policy. Under your administration, the national debt exploded by $8 trillion. $8 trillion. You boldly promised to eliminate it, and instead you doubled it. Your signature tax cut delivered 83% of its massive benefits directly to the top 1%. Your chaotic tariffs cost the average American family $2,000 a year in skyrocketing prices. You proudly called yourself the greatest jobs president in American history. And then you oversaw the most catastrophic job loss since the days of Herbert Hoover. Newsom was deep in his element now. The statistics flowed effortlessly. His rhythm was absolutely immaculate. And let me tell you a little bit about California. Mr. President, because I know the conservative media has painted a very distorted picture for you, California is the 5th largest economy in the entire world. Not the country, the world. We aggressively lead the nation in innovation, in clean energy, in cutting-edge technology, and in venture capital. Apple, Google, Tesla, Netflix, Meta, they are all right here. They are not hiding down in Mar-a-Lago. He paused, straightened his tie slightly, and stared directly into the main camera lens. Mr. President, you are a fundamental threat to democracy. You are a threat to the rule of law. And you are a direct threat to every single value that the state of California fiercely represents. I certainly did not have to invite you here into my state tonight, but I wanted all of America to see what happens when a governor firmly stands up to a bully. Enthusiastic applause erupted from the Democratic side of the room. Pelosi delivered another approving nod. Schumer leaned back in his chair, looking supremely satisfied. Jeffries crossed his arms, exuding the calm confidence of a man who firmly believed the battle had already been won in the opening minutes. Newsom returned to his chair, elegantly crossed his legs, and flashed his signature, gleaming smile. On the opposite side of the stage, Donald Trump had remained remarkably still. During the aggressive litany about his felony convictions, he had merely nodded along, looking almost profoundly bored. During the attack on the national debt, he had casually inspected his cufflinks. When Newsom boasted about California being the 5th largest economy, Trump had slowly picked up his glass of water and taken a long, deliberate sip. And during the grand, dramatic climax regarding the threat to democracy, a line that Newsom's debate coaches had undoubtedly spent 3 agonizing weeks perfecting, Trump had actually yawned. It was not a subtle, concealed yawn. It was a massive, fully visible on-camera yawn. It was the exact kind of reaction a man exhibits when he has heard a specific phrase so many thousands of times that the words have completely evaporated of all meaning. In the front row, Vance subtly hid a smirk behind his hand. DeSantis covered his mouth to mask a grin. Vivek Ramaswamy had to stare directly up at the convention center ceiling just to keep himself from laughing out loud. The moderator turned the floor over. Mr. President, your response. Trump stood up at his own pace. He strolled over to his podium, took a moment to adjust the positioning of his microphone, and then turned his gaze entirely upon Newsom. He stared at the governor for a long, heavy moment. 5 full seconds ticked by in total silence. Are you done, pretty boy? Trump finally asked. Half the room burst into sudden laughter. The other half gasped in genuine shock. On the left side of the aisle, Hakeem Jeffriah's confident smile instantly froze. On the right side, Ron DeSantis uncrossed his arms for the very first time all evening, and on Gavin Newsom's perfectly manicured face, the legendary smile flickered. It was just once, and only for a fraction of a second, much like a dying light bulb struggling for a connection. But it happened. In the front row, Nancy Pelosi's hand visibly tightened its grip on the strap of her purse. It was a nearly imperceptible gesture, but the tension was undeniably there. Trump did not launch into a defense regarding the felony convictions. He completely ignored the accusations about the national debt, the tax cuts, the tariffs, and the historical job losses. He allowed every single one of Newsom's meticulously crafted insults to simply hang dead in the air, discarded like old coats on an empty rack. Instead, Trump offered a warm, beaming smile to the crowd. Folks, Governor Newsom here just proudly told you that California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And you know what? He is right. He is absolutely 100% right. It is the 5th largest economy in the world. It is beautiful. Congratulations, Governor. I give you a giant gold star. Trump paused, his tone shifting into something sharper. But tell me this, Governor, if California is so historically great, if it is such a glittering, flawless paradise, then why on earth are your people fleeing like it's on fire? Newsom immediately leaned forward into his microphone. Mr. President, population fluctuations are a completely normal demographic phenomenon, if you would actually bother to look at the objective data, rather than just reading a conservative news ticker. It's normal. Trump immediately raised one finger, silencing the interruption. Normal, Governor? 1.7 million human beings have permanently left the state of California since you took office. 1.7 million. For context, that is the entire population of the city of Phoenix, Arizona. Imagine an entire massive American city packing up their bags and moving out of your state. And you have the nerve to sit there and call it normal? Trump reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I have the exact data right here, Governor. It's not from a cable news network. This is from the United States Census Bureau. Los Angeles County alone has lost 322,000 residents. Your biggest, most famous county. The county that has Hollywood. The county with the gorgeous beaches. The county with the perfect weather. Over 300,000 people looked at all of those incredible things and firmly said, "No, thank you. I would much rather live in Texas." Newsom attempted to regain control. He was a seasoned, highly effective debater, and he had a counter-argument fully prepared. Those specific numbers completely failed to account for the massive influx of international immigration, Mr. President. California continues to aggressively attract top-tier talent from all around the globe. Our overall population is stabilizing nicely, and our economy. Oh, so you are replacing them? Trump interjected loudly, dropping his phone onto the podium. You are actively replacing the hard-working American families who built the state of California over 3 generations with. Governor, listen to your own words. You just looked the people in this room in the eye and essentially told them that your grand plan is to replace them. Do the people sitting in this audience tonight really want to hear that their elected governors, a brilliant solution to a mass exodus, is just to replace them with somebody else? A low, anxious murmur rippled through the convention hall. On the Democratic side of the aisle, Chuck Schumer leaned over to an aide and whispered rapidly into his ear. The aide whispered back. Schumer's expression immediately darkened. And it is not just the citizens who are fleeing, Governor, Trump continued relentlessly. It is the major businesses. Tesla left California, Oracle left, Hewlett-Packard left. Charles Schwab left. Palantir left. They packed up, and they went to Texas. They went to Florida. They went to Tennessee. Trump momentarily broke his gaze with Newsom to look down at DeSantis in the front row. Ron, how many massive California companies did you successfully poach? DeSantis proudly held up one hand, spreading all 5 fingers wide. 5, maybe more, he mouthed. The entire right side of the auditorium erupted into laughter. Newsom fired back immediately, refusing to concede the economic argument. Apple is still headquartered here. Google is still here. Meta is still here. The entire backbone of the global innovation economy remains proudly headquartered in the state of California, and no amount of cherry-picking your data changes that. Governor, Trump countered, holding up his phone once again. Those corporate logos haven't left yet. But their actual employees have. Their workforce is currently working remotely from Austin, and from Miami, and from Nashville, and from Boise. Those massive tech companies only kept their shiny headquarters in California for the massive tax write-offs, while simultaneously moving their actual people to states where their people can actually afford to pay rent. You didn't keep the companies, Governor. You just kept the signage. In the front row, Vivek Ramaswamy shook his head in pure disbelief, distinctly mouthing the word, "Wow." Newsom resorted to his smile. It was that heavily rehearsed, impeccably polished, camera-ready smile. It was the exact same blinding grin that had successfully gotten him elected 3 separate times and landed him on the glossy covers of national magazines. Trump immediately stopped his attack. He stared intently at Newsom, and then slowly turned his head to look directly into the television camera. Take a good look at that smile, folks. I want you to really look at it. I just informed him that 1.7 million citizens fled his state in desperation. I just informed him that the biggest, most successful companies in American history are sprinting away from his leadership. And his only response is to sit there and smile. Trump let a heavy, suffocating silence sit over the room for 3 full seconds. Do you want to know why he smiles like that? It's because he literally does not have an answer. That empty smile is his only answer. Every single time Governor Newsom is backed into a corner and has absolutely nothing of substance to say, he just flashes his teeth at you. Remember that. Watch for it for the rest of tonight. Every time you see that smile appear, you are looking at a man who is completely out of ideas. In the front row, Nancy Pelosi's hardened expression did not shift an inch, but Jeffries threw a nervous, sidelong glance in her direction. She refused to meet his eyes. It was the first visible crack in the Democratic armor. Now, Governor, I want to pivot and talk about something that the hard-working people of California have absolutely not forgotten about. No matter how many times you try to smile your way out of it, Trump said, placing his hands flat on the edges of the podium. His voice grew firmer, the 6th of November 2020. On camera, Newsom's jaw visibly tightened by half a centimeter. In the stark lighting, it looked like a sudden, dark shadow crossing his face. The 6th of November 2020, Trump repeated, setting the scene with grim precision. The state of California is currently enduring the absolute worst, most terrifying surge of the COVID pandemic in its entire history. Governor Newsom here has just ordered, not politely asked, not gently suggested, but aggressively ordered the people of California to stay locked inside their homes. He has completely banned all indoor dining. He has strictly banned private gatherings of more than 3 households. He has literally commanded millions of Californians that they are forbidden from having a traditional Thanksgiving dinner with their own blood relatives. Local restaurants are forcefully closed. Small, generational businesses are rapidly dying. Public schools are bolted shut. Young children are sitting completely isolated in front of glowing Zoom screens for 8 agonizing hours a day, instead of sitting in vibrant classrooms with their lifelong friends and their dedicated teachers. Desperate small business owners are helplessly watching the grueling work of 20, 30, 40 years slide straight into bankruptcy. People are completely alone. People are deeply depressed. People are actively losing everything they have ever worked for. Trump paused. The silence was not employed as a theatrical effect, it was utilized for raw, crushing weight. And on that specific night, on that exact same evening, Trump pointed an accusatory finger. Governor Gavin Newsom sat down at the world-famous French Laundry restaurant in Napa Valley. $350 a plate. 12 people packed tightly at a table. Multiple different households mingling indoors. Absolutely no masks, zero social distancing, sitting shoulder to shoulder, laughing, and drinking expensive wine, and eating lavish lobster with high-powered lobbyists from the California Medical Association. Trump turned directly to Newsom. "Governor, your response." Newsom was more than ready. He had painstakingly practiced the response to this specific vulnerability hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. "Mr. President, I have addressed this specific incident publicly on many occasions. I clearly called it a mistake. I explicitly said it was wrong. I took full, complete responsibility for it. I completely owned it." "You owned it? What a beautiful, empty political word, Governor. You owned it," Trump mocked, his tone dripping with disdain. "But let me ask you a question that you have successfully dodged for years. You specifically told the press corps that night that it was merely outdoor dining. You explicitly claimed you were sitting safely outside. And then a local news station, Fox 11 Inches Los Angeles, heroically obtained photographic evidence that proved you were sitting entirely indoors. You were packed into a lavish private room with large sliding glass doors that had been firmly shut because your exclusive party was making entirely too much noise. You flat out lied about where you were sitting. Governor, you lied to the public about a dinner." Newsom quickly tried to interrupt, the polish starting to crack slightly. The restaurant featured doors that were initially open to the outside, and then the sliding doors. "Sliding doors, folks? Listen to him." Trump cut him off effortlessly. "They were completely open, and then they were magically closed, and then they were sliding. Governor, the damning photographs show you sitting firmly indoors, packed shoulder to shoulder, without a single medical mask in sight. 12 elites laughing and eating $350 steaks, while the state burned. Is that what outdoor dining looks like in your California?" Trump's demeanor suddenly shifted. The entertainer vanished, leaving behind a deeply serious prosecutor. "But honestly, that is not even the part that makes my blood boil, Governor. I get it. Politicians occasionally make mistakes. I have made plenty of mistakes myself. The part that genuinely angers me is what was happening to every other citizen in your state on that exact same night. On the same night you were happily eating luxurious lobster at a birthday party for a lobbyist, a political lobbyist, folks, not even a close family friend. A lobbyist on that same night, a devastated father in Sacramento, was legally forbidden from visiting his dying mother in the hospital because of your strict mandates. A grieving family down in Los Angeles could not hold a proper, dignified funeral for their beloved grandmother with more than 10 people present because of your executive order. A terrified man in Fresno who had proudly owned his family restaurant for 23 years was lying wide awake at 300 inches the morning, weeping and wondering how he was going to pay his rent because you had forcefully ordered his life's work shut down. And you? You were happily eating expensive lobster with 12 of your elite friends at a fancy restaurant, without a care in the world, and without a mask. Newsom leaned in, attempting to salvage his defense. Mr. President, I have stated repeatedly that I take full responsibility. You casually apologized for the dinner, Governor, Trump snapped back. Did you ever actually apologize for the brutal lockdowns? Did you ever apologize to the 6 million suffering children who lost a year of their lives staring blankly at computer screens? Did you ever apologize to the 10,000 independent restaurants that closed their doors permanently in California during your draconian lockdown? Did you look them in the eye and apologize? The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. And by the way, Governor, Trump added, turning the knife, while your iron-fisted lockdown was aggressively shutting down every single public school in the state of California, where exactly were your own children going to school? Newsom did not answer immediately. The half-second delay was highly visible and agonizing. My children attended. They were enrolled in a private school, Governor. In Sacramento? In person. In person, Trump pounced. While every other child in California was forcefully locked inside a house in front of a digital screen, you blatantly went on CNN, Governor, not Fox News, and you looked into the camera and claimed that you were a struggling Zoom parent. That was a complete and utter falsehood. Your wealthy children had real teachers. Your children had physical classrooms. Your children had their friends. Everybody else's children were given a cold laptop. Trump let the reality of the statement hang over the audience. Rules for thee, but not for me. Right, pretty boy? Trump turned his attention back to the massive audience. Folks, I want to make absolutely sure that everybody watching tonight truly understands what the French Laundry incident really means. It is not just about a fancy dinner. It is not even just about gross hypocrisy. It is the defining moment that tells you absolutely everything you need to know about the core character of the man standing on this stage tonight. Because I want you to remember what happened immediately after those photos leaked. The hard-working people of California were so furious, so deeply and personally betrayed by this man, that they successfully launched a massive recall election against their own sitting governor. Almost 2 million Californians eagerly signed a formal petition to legally remove him from power. 2 million verified signatures in a state completely controlled by the Democratic machine. Do you have any idea how overwhelmingly angry regular people have to be to try and recall their own governor? Do you know how many hundreds of thousands of people have to feel personally lied to? And do you know exactly when the vast majority of those signatures were enthusiastically collected, Governor? Right after the French Laundry photos hit the internet. Over 442,000 angry signatures flooded in between November and December of 2020 alone. That photo of you eating lobster was the spark. The brutal lockdowns were the gasoline. And 2 million people in your own backyard finally stood up and said, "Enough is enough." Newsom attempted one more desperate redirection. His voice tight. That massive recall effort failed miserably, Mr. President. The voters of California. The recall only failed because you shamelessly spent $50 a million fighting it, Governor. Trump shot back instantly. You completely outspent the grassroots opposition 5-1. You maliciously turned the entire election into a referendum on me, Donald Trump. Instead of letting it be a referendum on the failures of Gavin Newsom, you desperately changed the subject. And I will give you credit where it is due. You are very, very good at changing the subject. Honestly, that is your single greatest political talent. Not actually governing, just constantly changing the subject. Trump locked eyes with Newsom. But tonight, Governor, we are absolutely not changing the subject. In the front row, Chuck Schumer aggressively leaned over to his aide and whispered something frantic. The aide immediately stood up, hastily buttoned his jacket, and briskly walked out of the massive room through a side exit door. Nobody in the sprawling television audience noticed the movement. But the seasoned political operatives sitting in the front rows certainly did. Schumer's right-hand man had abandoned ship. Jeffries had completely stopped nodding his head. His hands were tightly folded together in his lap, and he was intensely studying the carpeted floor. And Nancy Pelosi, the grand architect of California politics, had not physically moved her body or changed her stony facial expression, but she had deliberately shifted her designer purse from her lap to the empty seat directly beside her. The gesture was incredibly subtle, almost entirely invisible to the untrained eye. But to those who knew her, it was the unmistakable preparatory gesture of a powerful woman who was getting ready to stand up and walk away. Newsom flashed his smile again. It was the exact same mechanical smile, but the entire audience had just been explicitly instructed by Trump to watch for it. Trump immediately saw it. "There is that famous smile again, Governor," Trump noted, his voice laced with pity. "You smiled brightly when I talked about millions of people fleeing your state in desperation. You smiled widely when I talked about the devastating hypocrisy of the French Laundry. Do you just smile at absolutely everything? Is that really how you emotionally get through the day? Somebody tragically loses their life's business, and you just smile? Somebody loses their beloved mother to your policies, and you smile? 1 million taxpayers leave, and you smile?" Trump paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped an octave, carrying a dark, heavy weight. "What exactly does it take to make you stop smiling, Governor? Because I honestly have not found it yet. But I promise you, before tonight is over, I will." That final line landed entirely differently from everything else said that evening. It was not a rehearsed joke. It was not a snappy debate zinger. It was a blood-curdling promise. And every single person in that room, both Democrats and Republicans alike, heard it exactly as a promise. "Now, Governor, since you love endlessly talking about California's booming economy, the 5th largest in the world. Beautiful. Let's talk about what actually happened to all that taxpayer money under your direct watch." Trump pulled his phone out once more. "Let's talk about California's Employment Development Department, the EDD. During the height of COVID, the EDD was supposed to efficiently send emergency unemployment checks to the desperate people who lost their jobs because of your forced lockdowns, people who genuinely needed help to survive, people who had been legally ordered to stop working by their own governor. Instead, your EDD sent $33 billion directly to criminals." Trump let the staggering number sit in the absolute silence of the room for 5 full seconds. $33 billion handed over to massive fraud rings, to dangerous organized crime syndicates, and to a sophisticated Chinese state-sponsored hacking group called, and I promise you I am not making this ridiculous name up, Governor, this is the actual documented name, Wicked Panda. Wicked Panda. A massive cybercrime operation run directly by the Chinese government successfully stole billions of dollars from California's vulnerable unemployment system, while your own struggling citizens were literally standing in the rain in lines at local food banks. Newsom leaned aggressively into the microphone. He was fighting hard now. He was still fighting. This was the exact moment where decades of elite debate training kicked in. The hardest: redirect the attack, reframe the narrative, explicitly transfer the blame. Mr. President, literally every single state in America dealt with complex unemployment fraud during the unprecedented chaos of the pandemic. This was a massive, nationwide problem caused directly by the unprecedented, reckless speed at which federal funds were distributed under your chaotic administration. Every state had fraud. Governor, that is factually true, Trump countered calmly. Texas lost $2 billion. Florida lost $1.5 billion. California lost $33 billion. Your state alone lost vastly more money than the next 10 states combined. Trump held up his phone like a damning piece of evidence. I really want you to hear those specific numbers again, Governor, because I honestly don't think you grasp what they actually mean. Texas, $2 billion. Florida, $1.5 billion. California, $33 billion. That is not a minor statistical rounding error. That is not a nationwide trend. That is your state system being a catastrophic 10 times worse than literally everybody else in the country. You do not get to cowardly blame the federal government for that disaster. The federal government didn't mismanage your EDD. You did. In the front row, Ron DeSantis leaned forward slightly in his chair. He had successfully governed the massive state of Florida through the exact same pandemic. His state had lost $1.5 billion, not 33. The silent visual comparison was doing devastating work in the minds of the audience. Newsom attempted another defense, but his voice was noticeably faster now, losing a degree of its polished smoothness. His rehearsed talking points were beginning to frantically overlap. We took incredibly swift, decisive action the moment the sophisticated fraud was identified. We aggressively brought in brand new leadership at the EDD, and we successfully implemented a highly comprehensive fraud detection framework that has since been recognized. Swift action, Governor? Trump interrupted, shaking his head. Let me tell the American people what your swift action actually looked like. At the absolute peak of the massive fraud, at the exact moment when billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars were freely flowing out of your state and straight to dangerous criminals in Russia and China and Nigeria, your EDD had exactly 2 employees formally assigned to check for suspicious claims. 2 individual human beings desperately monitoring billions of dollars in outgoing payments. 2 people. Governor. Trump held up 2 fingers for emphasis. And here is the horrifying part that should make every single taxpayer in this room physically ill. At one specific point during the pandemic, California literally had more people applying for unemployment benefits than there were actual living adults in the entire state of California. More applications than adults. I want everyone to really think about that. Every single adult in California could have theoretically applied, and there still would have been millions of applications left over. They were completely phantom applications. Ghost applications, fraudulent applications from people who literally did not exist, submitted by international criminals on the other side of the planet. And your brilliant fraud department had 2 overwhelmed people checking the paperwork. Newsom forcefully opened his mouth for a third counterattack. His voice had sharply risen half an octave. He wasn't screaming, and he wasn't overly emotional, but the rapid rhythm was entirely different now. The glossy polish was aggressively starting to show its frayed seams. That is a gross, deliberate mischaracterization of our advanced fraud detection infrastructure. We had highly complex automated systems firmly in place. That. Automated systems, Governor? Trump pounced. Your brilliant automated systems actively approved massive payments to convicted inmates sitting inside your state prisons. Your automated systems happily sent massive checks to residential addresses that did not even physically exist. Your automated systems eagerly paid out claims using the Social Security numbers belonging to dead people. And by the way, those are absolutely not my partisan talking points. Newsom tried one final, desperate maneuver. He was visually reaching for a lifeline now. The sheer scale of the global pandemic demanded the rapid, immediate deployment of emergency resources. And realistically, some degree of fraud was unfortunately inevitable. Some fraud, $33 billion, is not some fraud. Governor, Trump said, his voice cold and hard. $33 billion is a historic heist. It is objectively the largest single theft of public taxpayer money in the entire history of the United States of America. And it happened entirely on your watch, right in your state. straight through your department, managed under your hand-picked appointees. And by the way, Governor, speaking of your appointees, your former esteemed Chief of Staff, Dana Williamson, the powerful woman who worked right in your inner office, who sat comfortably in the chair right outside your door, she is currently under an active FBI criminal investigation for allegedly falsifying official documents and using federal pandemic relief funds to illegally enrich her own personal business. Your own Chief of Staff, Governor, the person sitting closest to you in state government, under active FBI investigation right now. Exactly as we sit here tonight. Newsom's mouth remained open, but absolutely nothing came out. His hand was resting heavily on the podium. The hand itself was still, but the strained tendons beneath the skin were highly visible to the cameras. And since we are already on the important subject of wasting money, Governor, let us talk about the crisis of homelessness. Trump pivoted seamlessly. Your grand signature issue, you aggressively promised to end homelessness way back when you were the mayor of San Francisco. That was 20 long years ago. Since you were sworn in as governor, California has burned through $37 billion on homelessness programs. $37 billion. And yet, homelessness in your state has skyrocketed by 31%. Nationally, the crisis went down by 10%. But in California, strictly under Gavin Newsom's leadership, it exploded upward, $37 billion. Governor, and your own state auditor, publicly stated that you completely failed to track where the money actually went. $37 billion, and you cannot truthfully tell the struggling people of California where a single dime of it is. Trump took a breath, holding the stage hostage. And just one more quick thing about money, Governor, before I am finally done with the math. Panera Bread. You proudly signed a strict minimum wage law that suspiciously contained a highly specific, special exemption that miraculously happened to benefit Panera Bread franchises. And the largest Panera Bread franchise owner in the entire state of California just happens to be a wealthy man named Greg Flynn. Your close personal friend, your major financial donor. Trump paused, deliberately counting on his fingers slowly, so the audience could follow the devastating math. $33 billion stolen, $37 billion completely wasted, and your wealthy donor gets a special sweetheart deal on minimum wage laws. That is $70 billion, Governor. $70 billion completely gone under your watch, in your state. And you have the absolute audacity to stand here smiling and telling me that California is the 5th largest economy in the world? Trump shook his head in disgust. Governor, with $70 billion extra dollars, California should be the first. In the second row on the left side of the aisle, 2 California Democratic congressmen quietly stood up, one after the other. They did not make eye contact. They did not look toward Newsom on the stage. They briskly walked toward 2 completely different exits. They vanished through different doors, leaving behind glaringly empty seats. The main television cameras did not immediately catch their departure, but the anxious people sitting directly near them certainly noticed. Schumer was now precariously perched on the absolute edge of his seat. His back was no longer resting against the chair. He was physically positioned to stand up at a moment's notice. Jeffries was staring intensely at Pelosi. Pelosi was still seated, but her purse was now firmly grasped in her hand. On the right side of the aisle, absolutely nothing had changed. Every single Republican seat remained completely full. Vance had scribbled something in his leather notebook and casually shown it to DeSantis. DeSantis read the note, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise, and he nodded once in agreement. Vivek Ramaswamy was no longer even attempting to hide his raw reaction. He was openly shaking his head, his mouth slightly agape in shock. Trump carefully set his phone down on the podium. When he finally spoke again, His entire demeanor had shifted. His voice was radically different. It was much lower, much slower. The grand showman was gone. The aggressive counterpuncher had vanished. The entertainer, the boisterous performer who had been laughing and dramatically pointing and playing to the energized crowd, that man had completely stepped off the stage, leaving behind someone intensely quiet and deeply serious. "Governor, I have exactly one more thing I need to say to you tonight," Trump said softly. The cavernous room went entirely still. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating stillness that has absolutely nothing to do with the mere absence of sound. "I take absolutely no pleasure in this one. I really, truly don't, because what I am about to say is highly personal. I generally do not like getting deeply personal in these debates. I would much rather talk about creating jobs and fixing the economy and securing the border and all the critical things that actually matter to the hard-working people sitting in this room. But you chose to start this debate tonight by dramatically calling me a dangerous threat to democracy. You sneeringly called me a convicted felon. You aggressively attacked my personal character. So, I think it is only fair and just that the good people of California finally hear the truth about yours." Trump locked his eyes onto Newsom. "Governor, back in 2005, you were the rising star mayor of San Francisco. You were 40 years old. You had a dedicated man working tirelessly for you. His name was Alex Turk." Gavin Newsom's face instantly changed. It was not a massive, dramatic theatrical shift. It was not a loud gasp, or a physical flinch, or a highly visible recoil. It was something much smaller, and infinitely much worse. The tight muscles around his eyes instantly went flat and dead. The practiced performance, the constant, low-level theatrical performance that had been flawlessly running in the background since the moment he walked onto the stage, stopped for the absolute first time in his entire gilded political career. On live national television, Gavin Newsom's face was simply a human face. It was not a glossy campaign poster. It was not an airbrushed magazine cover. It was just a face, and it was the utterly terrified face of a man who had just heard the name of someone he had been desperately trying to erase from his memory for 19 long years. "Alex Turk was your loyal deputy chief of staff," Trump continued, his voice devoid of malice, but full of devastating fact. "He expertly ran your political election campaigns. He brilliantly designed your most successful public initiative, Project Homeless Connect. He had been fiercely loyal to you for 10 solid years. 10 years. Governor, he happily went to baseball games with you. He shared intimate dinners with you and your wife. He was your closest, most trusted political advisor. He was your best friend." In the front row, Nancy Pelosi abruptly stood up. She firmly gripped her purse. She did not utter a single word. She did not cast a glance at Gavin Newsom. She did not look at Hakeem Jeffries, or Chuck Schumer, or anyone else in the room. She simply stood up, turned sharply, walked to the main aisle, and headed straight toward the exit. Her sharp heels made a distinct, soft clicking sound against the hard convention center floor. The rhythmic sound was instantly picked up by a sensitive boom microphone hovering near the front row. 40 million people clearly heard Nancy Pelosi abandon the room. She walked right through the heavy exit doors, and they swung shut behind her. The VIP chair she had been sitting in, the premier chair dead in the center of the front row, the chair that had just been occupied by arguably the most powerful woman in the entire history of the Democratic Party, was now glaringly empty. Trump did not even bother to look down at the empty chair. He did not have to. Every single television camera in the room had already rapidly cut to it. He turned back to Newsom and continued, "Alex Turk had a wife. Her name was Ruby Rippy Turk. She also worked directly in your office, Governor. She was your personal appointment secretary. She was a young, vulnerable woman working directly for her husband's absolute best friend. Her husband deeply trusted you. She deeply trusted you. Every single person working in that office trusted you. And you, Governor Gavin Newsom, carried on a secret sexual affair with her, with your best friend's wife, with a direct subordinate working inside your own office, all while your absolute best friend was exhausting himself running your political campaign and desperately trying to build your entire career. Trump let the brutal words sit in the silence. He did not follow the revelation with a snappy zinger. He did not chuckle. He simply let the ugly truth exist in the heavy air. You didn't do this with a random stranger, Governor. Not with someone you briefly met at a political conference. You did it with the wife of the man who was vastly more loyal to you than any other human being in your entire professional life. The man who personally created your vaunted homeless program, the man who tirelessly knocked on thousands of doors for you, the man who fiercely defended you to aggressive reporters when absolutely nobody else would, the man who sacrificed his evenings making endless phone calls so that Gavin Newsom could become the mayor, and while Alex Turk was doing all of that back-breaking work for you, while he was working late into the night just to build your career, you were sleeping with his wife inside your own office. Trump paused, and something profound in his tone shifted once again. The grand showman was completely gone. The aggressive counterpuncher was gone. The man who was speaking now was not performing for the cameras. He was just talking man to man. I am absolutely not a saint, Governor. Everybody in the world knows that. The tabloid magazines have exhaustively covered every single mistake I have ever made in my life. I have gone through 2 highly public divorces. I have admittedly said foolish things I probably should not have said. I am absolutely not standing here tonight pretending to be a flawless, perfect husband or a perfect man. Nobody who actually knows me would ever believe that, and I would certainly not insult the intelligence of this audience by pretending otherwise, but I have never once in my entire life done what you did. I have never slept with my best friend's wife. I have never deeply betrayed a man who trusted me that completely. Because there are just some fundamental things that a real man simply does not do, Governor. There are some hard moral lines that a man never crosses. No matter how politically powerful he is, no matter how much alcohol he has had to drink, and no matter how good his hair looks. And you crossed it. Dead, suffocating silence gripped the room. Chuck Schumer finally stood up. He slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He did not make eye contact with a single person. He walked directly to the aisle and silently followed the exact same path Pelosi had taken just 30 seconds earlier. The heavy exit door closed behind him. 2 more crucial chairs in the Democratic fortress were now empty. Your best friend finally found out, Trump continued relentlessly. And he didn't find out because you had the courage to tell him. He found out because his wife finally confessed to him. She was tragically in a rehab facility for severe alcohol and substance abuse, and as a necessary part of her grueling recovery, she was strictly required to be completely honest with her husband about the terrible thing she had done. So, she bravely did the exact thing you were entirely too much of a coward to do, Governor. She told him the devastating truth. And Alex Turk, the single most loyal man in your entire political life, walked straight into your office on the 31st of January 2007, looked you dead in the face, and resigned on the spot after 10 years of service. The very next morning, you hastily held a pathetic press conference. It lasted exactly 2 minutes. You stood there, and you said, and I am quoting your exact words, "Governor, everything you have heard and read is true, and I am deeply sorry." 2 more California Democratic officials stood up from the second row and departed quietly through entirely different doors. And then you cowardly blamed the alcohol. Governor Trump stated, his voice laced with disgust. You tearfully told the press corps that you had a severe drinking problem. You solemnly told the people of California that you would immediately seek professional help. The media sympathetically reported that you heroically entered a treatment program, and the good people of California, because they are fundamentally decent, forgiving people, they gave you a second chance. They genuinely believed your story, and then exactly 11 years later, in 2018, you sat down and told the Sacramento Bee, and I have the exact quote right here on my phone, Governor, you can check it yourself. If you want, you arrogantly said, quote, there is no rehab. I just stopped. There was no treatment, no nothing related to any of that stuff. End quote. Trump looked directly, piercingly at Newsom. You solemnly promised the trusting people of this state that you would get professional help for a severe drinking problem. You aggressively used that promise as a convenient, sympathetic excuse for sleeping with your best friend's wife. You let the entire state of California foolishly believe you were actively in treatment, and then you casually admitted more than a decade later, when you arrogantly thought absolutely nobody was paying attention anymore, that there was never any treatment, there was no rehab, there was absolutely nothing. You blatantly lied about going to rehab the exact same way you blatantly lied about the outdoor dining, Governor. In the front row, Hakeem Jeffries slowly lowered his head. He was now staring fixedly at the tips of his own shoes. Governor, in the 2018 gubernatorial debate, your political opponent said something about you that I genuinely believe is the single truest thing anyone has ever said about Gavin Newsom. Trump paused, letting the silence build. He said, if you can't trust Gavin with his best friend's wife, how can you possibly trust him with your state? Trump stared intensely at Newsom, absolutely refusing to break eye contact. I truly think that is the exact question the American people desperately need answered tonight, Governor. Not your manipulated GDP numbers, not your polished talking points about the fifth largest economy, and certainly not your blinding smile. It comes down to that single question. Can they trust you? Can anyone on earth actually trust you? Your absolute best friend couldn't. The trusting people who believed your fake rehab story couldn't. The desperate families who blindly followed your draconian lockdown rules while you happily ate expensive lobster couldn't. Can anyone, Governor? Can anyone trust you? Newsom gripped the podium, his knuckles bone white. He desperately tried to summon his rehearsed cadence, the smooth rhythm that had carried him through countless debates. I have addressed this, but his famous smile was completely gone. For the first time on live television, Gavin Newsom's perfectly manufactured persona cracked wide open. Behind the impenetrable polish, there was no anger, no grief, just an echoing blank space. He strained to force a smile, but it was merely a terrifying mechanical twitch, devoid of any genuine human emotion. There it is, folks, Trump said quietly into his microphone, as 40 million people watched the smile just stop working. Newsom clung to the podium. Behind him, the Democratic VIP section was an abandoned wasteland of empty chairs. Across the aisle, the Republican section watched the carnage in absolute stillness. Governor, I have one last question, Trump continued, his voice dropping to a devastating cadence. 23 years in high public office, endless speeches and fawning interviews. I want you to name exactly one specific human being whose actual life is materially better today because of Gavin Newsom. Someone who would proudly stand here and say, Gavin Newsom changed my life. Name one. Deafening silence swallowed the room. Just one, Trump whispered. Newsom's mouth fell open. His right hand shakily rose, his index finger extending to make a declarative point. But no words came. The trembling hand hovered uselessly in the dead air, then fell limply to his side. His lips parted, but absolutely no sound emerged. In the suffocating silence, 2,000 attendees sat terrifyingly still, while 43 million viewers watched a powerful man desperately try to remember a single person he had helped and completely fail. On the exact 11th second, Newsom's sweaty palm violently slipped against the podium. The microphone caught the heavy thud, projecting a horrific electronic groan that sounded exactly like a dying machine. It was the final sound of his presidential ambitions. "I think I have said everything I need to say," Newsom mumbled, turning his back. He exited through the side door. Hakeem Jeffries rose and walked out without looking back. Across the aisle, steady, profoundly serious applause finally erupted. Trump picked up his microphone. "A smile is not leadership or character. Good night." Within 90 minutes, The Smile Stopped trended worldwide. The 1-second video of dead air generated 50 million views. Newsom's polling plummeted to 9%. The next morning, Ron DeSantis delivered the final blow. The president found the off switch. At 200 inches the morning, Newsom sat alone inside his luxurious hotel suite, staring blankly into the harsh bathroom mirror. Amidst frantic, ignored messages, he desperately tried to smile. It was dead. Trembling, he violently ran his fingers through his immovable, camera-ready hair. The heavy gel surrendered, and the meticulously maintained facade finally collapsed. Picking up his phone, he scrolled to a name he hadn't spoken in 19 years, Alex Turk. He stared at the screen. He did not press call. Turning off the light, he lay fully clothed on the bed. He closed his eyes, but the smile never returned.